All right, so I've had the Sony A7S III for 12 hours now, and these are my initial impressions, and we're gonna be doing it camera conspiracy style. So first off, the good. This thing is absolutely amazing. You should watch my unboxing for my super initial impressions, which are more physical. To add on to that, the buttons feel really good. They're a little bit mushy. They're not as tactile as I want them to be, but they're bigger and you can't really like mess them up. There's a nice travel to them, so that's nice. The scroll wheel feels really mushy, and I don't know why that is. Maybe that's just my model, but I'm not a huge fan of how the scroll wheel feels, especially coming from my A7R III, which felt like there was no give whatsoever, and I really appreciated that. But on this one, there's definitely some give, and I don't like how loose it feels. The top setting wheel is actually really nice now that the video and manual are right next to each other. So if I ever feel like switching from video to photo, it's just instantaneous. I don't need to do the whole circle to get where I want to get. Also, forgive me if I'm looking to the side. I'm looking at the flip out LCD for exposure because we're in broad daylight instead of the lens. And that's another feature that I freaking love on the A7S III. It's just awesome being able to have that flip screen. You can see that the eye tracking is working, and we're just gonna expose for me now with the ND. And yeah, I'm a huge fan of this camera. Right now it feels really good in the hands, so I actually don't have it on like a GorillaPod or a tripod or anything. I'm just hand holding it because that weight is really, really nice. We're also on active stab, so that active stabilization is one of the new features with that 1.1 crop. We're on the 20mm 1.8G. How's it looking? I would love to know what you think. Are we getting any wobble? Are we getting some weird shifting? From my very initial experience, the active stabilization looks really, really good, almost gimbal-like, but it's not perfect. There will be a couple times where it just shifts randomly. So I don't know if that's possible to fix in a firmware update or what, but we might need to think about that. I do really want to try out the gyro data. I have yet to do that, so that'll be coming in a different test. This is just the super initial impressions. How you liking that backlighting? How am I looking? Am I exposed correctly? We'll see. Definitely learning the ins and outs of S-Log3. That's what we're in right now. We want that peak dynamic range. We're at the base ISO of 640. So I was playing around with that last night. It was really, really good. Another thing I freaking love about this camera is the placement of the record button. It just feels right when you're using it. It's where C1 used to be on the 3rd gen cameras, and I'm just triggering it all the time, and it's just instantaneous. I just love it because it makes my life so much easier not having it on the back, and I can just press it here when I'm looking at myself to know that it's recording and everything is good. And it's just, instead of having it on the back, it's just so much nicer and so much easier, so much more convenient, especially for your video-centric camera. Another thing I've noticed about this camera is that the audio is significantly better. Whereas I had this exact same mic on my A7R III, I had to be at setting like 6 or 7 and I'd still be clipping at times. This one I can bump up to like 14 and not clip, and it sounds much better. So I guess the preamps or whatever Sony's doing in this camera for audio, much better. You can take hotter running mics, I guess, which is really, really nice to see. So that's a huge plus if you want that shotgun life. All right, we're back to the backlighting. Let me know how it looks. We're definitely blowing out the sky here, but more initial impressions. Last night I did some very preliminary low light tests. Like right now it's saying that we're 1.3 stops overexposed. And it's literally pitch black outside. We're at f2.8 and it's saying we're almost 1.5 stops overexposed. This is insane. I was blown away. I have never been this blown away by a camera absolutely insane. It, like, places where I need a flashlight to walk, this camera could see in the dark, looked perfectly exposed. Didn't even look like nighttime. It looked like golden hour or like daytime, but with dark sky. It just didn't make sense. This camera literally sees in the dark, and I'm mind blown by that. And I'm still learning how to color grade S-Log3, so I just kind of threw an RE LUT on it, and it looked great. And I was like, how does it see at night like that? It's insane. All right, there's no one around, so I took off the mask because why not? And yeah, that night stuff was absolutely amazing. I also did some quick night photography. No grain. I was between ISO 2000 and 12,800, no grain. Hey, Editor Marc here. Something I forgot to mention on my walkabout is that the shutter is significantly quieter. I don't know what they're doing, but there's some black magic going on here. The electronic shutter is silent, as you know, but the electronic front curtain shutter, very silent, and I always turn that off because of the bokeh issue, so I highly recommend you do that if you don't already. So I'm purely mechanical shutter, and even that was super quiet, super dampened, significantly quieter than my R3. So if you're wanting to do some stealth photography or street photography or something like that, that really comes in handy. Obviously, this is not a photocentric camera, but if you want to do some night photography with it, it's pretty freaking awesome that you can get perfectly non-grainy exposed photos at pitch black. Like, some of these circumstances were literally pitch black, and my R3 would not be able to recover that cleanly. I would have to do so much work to get it to look. Switch. Oh, we're overexposed. Here we go. There we go. All right. We're just gonna up that. ND, variable ND. How you liking the variable ND? I might need to get a new one. We'll see. But yeah, what was I gonna say? Night photography was super dope. Really enjoyed. All right, now we're in the shadow. We gotta up that. Super, super dope, that night photography. I definitely want to do a dedicated night photography test with this camera, and that video will be coming, best believe. But all right, now we gotta, yeah, being able to see yourself in the exposure, super helpful. I love that the eye autofocus is there telling me that I'm in focus. What else? Yes, files playing back on the computer. I was shooting the all eye mode, highest quality, 4K 24 422 10-bit, all eye, the SI mode, and my computer had no problem playing them back, so that was awesome. When I had to do the 120 mode, the non-S&Q, you have to drop it down to the HS mode, which is the H.265 mode, I believe, and that's a lot harder on your computer. So there was definitely some frame dropping going on in the laptop in editing while that was going on. But that's 4K 120, you know, I can't even complain. 4K 120 on a camera, on a computer that actually, like, sure, drop frames, but you can edit it and play it back and it's not laggy beyond compare. That's pretty impressive. Going back to some space management, because these photos are only 12 megapixels, you're gonna be able to take a lot of photos. Like, I think compressed RAW, I was getting around 8,000. I assume uncompressed RAW around 4,000. That's a lot of photos. However, video definitely takes up space. I only shot a little bit of video last night and I was already at 14 gigs. So definitely expect more than double the space from your previous cameras, since those were capped at 100 megabits per second. These ones are going between 280 and 600. So 280 seems to be like the top end when you're not in like S&Q mode or 4K 60. But yeah, it's definitely going to increase file size, and you should be aware of that. So you need to get some more hard drives because that's going to eat that space up. Speaking of hard drives, this 160 gigabyte card only does an hour 25 4K. And if you're buying this camera, you're most likely shooting 4K because that's what it specializes in. And an hour 25 for 160 gigabytes just feels so little. Like, oh, it hurts my soul paying $400 for a 160 gigabyte card, and it only gets me an hour and 25 minutes. And then also with those higher codecs and those, you know, larger megabits per second, bigger files, higher quality files, flip out screen, super high-end EVF, which is great. Love that. Your battery life is obviously going to take a hit. It's not going to be as good as the previous gen cameras. Sorry if I keep shaking the camera when I'm switching hands. This camera is chunkier. It's heftier than the previous gen cameras, so it's not as light, and just holding it by like the camera lens combination gets a little bit heavy on my arms. Colors look really good on this camera. Love that. But going back to battery life, yeah, it's not going to be what you're used to with the previous gen cameras. It is going to sip it a lot more than you're anticipating. Like right now we're at 82%. I started this video at 100%, so it's definitely sucking that battery life a lot more than we're accustomed to. It's not as bad as like the days before the Z battery where you needed like 800 batteries to just shoot for 40 minutes. But you know, you definitely want to buy some more batteries because it is going to take up more juice than you're used to, and it's not all day battery life on one battery anymore. So I'd say get 2 to 3 if you're doing some client work, just to be safe. I currently have 4, but yeah, 2 to 3 I think is a good safe bet. What else have I tested out? I did the touchscreen focus tracking. That I had difficulty getting to work as advertised. I'm sure as I get better with the camera, I'll get it to work more properly. But in my very initial tests last night, it would track the subject halfway and then just lose them and either pick up a different subject or just kind of stay where it lost them. And I was like, that's a little bit of a bummer thing, because, you know, just being able to touch the focus point that you want to focus on was one of the leading factors of this. So I'm sure it's probably some user error. I'll have to learn how to use that properly. But that was just, you know, my initial 12-hour test with that. Very, very, very preliminary, so take everything with a grain of salt. Also, going back to some build quality stuff, the doors on the side of the camera that have all the ports, much higher quality, inspire much more confidence. They're not flapping around everywhere. It's really nice. And the mic jack above the touchscreen, almost just broke my ankle, is really nice that it doesn't block the touchscreen at all. I will say though that the mic jack is just a tad loose, which I don't really understand. Like, I can definitely jiggle the mic jack while it's in the port, and I don't know why that is. It's secure and it's not going to fall out, but I've never had a mic jack where it actually jiggles on the camera instead of just sitting there. So I don't know why it's not that tight of a fit, but that's what it is on this camera, I guess, at least my model anyway. So be prepared for a jiggly audio jack when you're plugged in. The microphone is also a lot better on this camera. I know most people aren't going to be using the internal mic, so it's a very minute thing to note, but the internal mic is definitely better. It sounds better than the previous gen mics. But yeah, if you're using it for scratch audio, great. But most people are going to be hooking up more professional audio to this, like I have with my shotgun mic right here. How do I sound, actually? I'm kind of curious to see, now that I've boosted the levels and we're not super under-leveled like last night, how we're sounding. Also this morning, I started messing with the menus and setting this camera up so it's more similar to my A7R III and what I'm accustomed to. And I also turned on the Rec. 709 Gamma Assist for S-Log3. And that is definitely helping with exposure, because S-Log3 is just so flat that it's hard to tell from just looking at the image, and the histogram is not always accurate, and I'm still trying to learn how to properly expose S-Log3. Like the internet always says, you know, do the 2 stops over exposure, expose to the right with S-Log, and I'm like, yeah, but that was for the old cameras. This has better dynamic range, better low light, better colors, and I don't want to be clipping those highlights by overexposing, because, you know, the shadows are already super good because of this sensor, so I don't need to be losing that highlight information to get less grain in the shadows, because there's already practically no grain in the shadows, which is really nice. I don't know if I already talked about this, but this camera definitely does have dual native ISO, so that's awesome. It's the 640 and then it's 12,800. I noticed this last night while shooting the night stuff. And because I'd heard from Gerald Undone as well as Philip Bloom that this feature existed, and even before running just the lens cap test in low light scenarios, that there's a significant noise drop off when you go to 12,800 from the previous one. So yes, there's definitely that dual gain ISO, that dual native ISO, which is really awesome to see on this camera, especially in low light. You're shooting at 12,800, you're set. And then also in lit conditions, which is practically just horrible street lamp lighting or like shop lighting, I was at 640 and I had to stop down. Like, that's the mind-blowing thing. This camera just sees in the dark. Like, any light source is gonna look really good. You can light practically anything with horrible lighting and it'll expose correctly, which is mind-blowing. So yeah, like even street lamps that I was taking photos and videos of last night, I had to stop down. Like, it's mind-blowing shooting night photography and videography at like f4 because it's too bright for the camera. And then also, you're able to shoot because of that, because of its night vision and its crazy overexposure of everything, you're able to shoot 4K 120 at night. No grain, no nothing. Everything just looks clean. And I was like, oh my God, I'm getting 4K 120 at night? 120 at night? Like, you always need an insane amount of light. Like, even in a controlled environment, I always need to have my light on like 100%. I need that lighting to hit the product stuff in my studio perfectly. And even then, I still need to raise the ISO. But on this, I was like, oh my God, I'm shooting 4K 120 and I'm perfectly exposed. I'm not worried about being underexposed. That's mind-blowing. Yeah, I think that's most of the features I want to talk about. The speakers on the side also sound a little bit better if you're doing playback on the camera and don't have headphones, so that's kind of nice. Battery life, again, is just something you're gonna have to be aware of. We've been shooting for less than 20 minutes and we're already at 75%, so that's something you got to start thinking about in the back of your mind, that it's not infinite battery life like it was before. Like, I had shot weddings on like 2 batteries, like for 12 hours, and I'm definitely not going to be able to do that on 2 batteries with this camera. So those are my first impressions of the A7S III 12 hours later. Do let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I'm always intrigued. I'm going to be doing a ton more tests. This channel is going to be practically becoming an A7S III channel for the foreseeable future. So if you want to know more about this camera, please do like and subscribe. It does help out the channel. And let me know what you guys want to see, or if you have any questions, and I will try and make those videos for you and answer as many questions as I can. My name is Marc Steiner, and I'll see you next time.